I slammed my hand against the steering wheel and immediately regretted it. My head throbbed in protest, the familiar pressure building behind my right eye. Not today. Not now. The traffic stretched ahead of me like a metallic river, motionless and unforgiving. I was already late for the meeting with the new clients, the biggest potential contract our company had seen in years. And now this migraine was threatening to derail everything. I fumbled through the glove compartment, my fingers searching desperately for the familiar shape of my inhaler. Nothing. The realization hit me harder than the pain. I'd left it on the nightstand this morning. April had distracted me again, rushing out the door with barely a goodbye, claiming another early meeting at the medical center. The headache intensified as I thought about my wife. 8 years of marriage, and lately I barely recognized her. The woman who used to curl against me each night now retreated to her side of the bed, phone clutched in her hand, smiling at messages she never shared. "It's just work stuff, Chris," she'd say, turning the screen away. "Nothing you'd understand." The light finally changed and I inched forward, squinting against the morning sun. The new house we'd bought after my promotion cast a long financial shadow. 2-story, 4 bedrooms in the prestigious east side of town. The dream home April had always wanted. The dream that was slowly becoming a nightmare. My phone buzzed. "George, my boss." "Chris, where the hell are you?" "The Westfield team is already in the conference room." 10 minutes away, I lied, still stuck in gridlock. "Traffic's a nightmare." "Just get here," he growled before hanging up. I massaged my temples, trying to push back the pain. The doctors had explained my condition clearly enough. An unusual vascular anomaly that triggered migraines under stress. Manageable with medication, they said. Just avoid stress, they said. I nearly laughed at the thought. By the time I reached the office parking lot, my vision was starting to blur at the edges. Bad sign. Very bad sign. I grabbed my briefcase and presentation folder, then sat for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to will the pain away. The elevator ride to the 5th floor was torture. Each ding of the passing floors reverberated through my skull like a hammer blow. I popped 2 aspirin dry, knowing they'd barely touch this kind of pain, but desperate for any relief. Penny, George's assistant, spotted me immediately as I stepped onto our floor. "Oh my God, Chris, you look terrible." She rushed over, her voice mercifully low. "Is it another migraine?" I nodded, immediately regretting the movement. "They're waiting for you. George is stalling, but they're getting impatient." The conference room loomed ahead, its glass walls revealing a table of stern-faced executives in expensive suits. George was gesturing animatedly, his fake smile stretched to breaking point. "I need my inhaler," I whispered. "I forgot it at home." Penny squeezed my arm. "Can you make it through the presentation? It's only 40 minutes. The thought of standing under those fluorescent lights, talking technical specifications while my brain felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The room tilted slightly. "I'll try," I managed, straightening my tie with trembling fingers. When George spotted me through the glass, relief washed over his face. He gestured emphatically for me to join them. I took one step forward, then another. That's when it happened. The aura that preceded my worst attacks exploded across my vision, bright zigzagging lines obscuring everything. The folder slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, technical drawings and cost analysis sheets scattering across the polished floor like autumn leaves. I heard Penny's gasp, felt her steady hands guiding me to a chair. Through the kaleidoscope of pain and fractured vision, I saw George's face transform from relief to horror to resignation. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, though I wasn't sure if the words actually escaped my lips. As my consciousness narrowed to a pinpoint of agony, one thought remained crystal clear. The invisible cracks in my life were about to become gaping chasms. And neither my career nor my marriage would survive the collapse that was coming. Little did I know just how prophetic that thought would prove to be. The conference room lights blurred into halos as I clutched the edge of the table. 12 pairs of eyes stared at me, some concerned, others impatient. I'd managed to gather my scattered papers and stumble through the introduction of our maintenance proposal, but now the words on my notes swam before me like alphabet soup. "Mr. Peterson, are you all right?" asked the lead client, a woman whose name I could no longer recall. My tongue felt too large for my mouth. The metallic taste of approaching disaster filled my senses. "I need to." I never finished the sentence. My stomach lurched, and I knew I had seconds before embarrassing myself completely. With mumbled apologies, I staggered to my feet and toward the door, bumping into chairs as the room tilted around me. George appeared at my elbow, his angry whisper cutting through the fog of pain. "Pull yourself together, Chris. This contract is worth millions." I wanted to explain about the inhaler, the medication, but could only shake my head. The motion sent lightning bolts of agony behind my eyes. "For God's sake," George huffed, then louder to the room, "please excuse us for 5 minutes. Technical clarification needed." He practically dragged me into the hallway. Once the door closed behind us, his professional mask dropped. "What the hell, Chris? You look like death." "Migraine," I managed. "Bad one. No meds." George ran a hand through his thinning hair. Despite his frustration, genuine concern flickered across his face. We'd known each other 15 years, since I was just a junior mechanic and he was floor supervisor. He championed my promotion last month. "The Westfield people are flying out tonight. We don't get this presentation right, Brighton Equipment will snatch the contract." He sighed, studying my face. "But you're no good to anyone like this. Penny?" His secretary appeared almost instantly, as if she'd been hovering nearby. "Take Chris home. I'll finish the presentation." "But the technical specifications?" I protested weakly. "I've been listening to you talk about hydraulic maintenance systems for a decade. I'll manage." He clapped my shoulder, then winced apologetically when I flinched. "Get some rest. We'll discuss this tomorrow." Penny guided me to the elevator, her small hand steady on my arm. The descent to the parking garage was merciful silence until she said, "I'll drive you. My car's just over here." "No, I can." "Don't be stupid," she cut me off with surprising firmness. "You can barely walk straight." I surrendered, sinking into the passenger seat of her compact car. The leather was cool against my burning skin. As she navigated through midday traffic, I closed my eyes against the too bright world. "So," Penny said after a few minutes, her voice deliberately casual, "did April mention anything about the Christmas party last month?" The question pierced through my pain haze. "What about it?" Penny adjusted her grip on the steering wheel. "Nothing. Just, there were some rumors. Office gossip, you know how it is." Something in her tone made me open my eyes. "What rumors?" She bit her lip. "It's probably nothing. But April seemed friendly with Dr. Cummings. The new medical director at her center? Tall guy, salt and pepper hair. I vaguely recalled meeting him at some hospital function. Handsome in that polished country club way that always made me conscious of my mechanic's hands, no matter how many promotions I received. "They're colleagues," I said, though uncertainty crept into my voice. April had been mentioning his name a lot lately. "Dr. Cummings said this, Dr. Cummings suggested that." "Of course," Penny backpedaled quickly. "I shouldn't have said anything. It's just at the party they were—" "Never mind. Ignore me." We turned onto my street, the neat row of two-story homes a testament to suburban success. A strange car sat in my driveway, a sleek black Audi I didn't recognize. "Whose car is that?" I mumbled, my migraine momentarily forgotten. Penny slowed down. "Maybe a neighbor's? Or a delivery? April shouldn't be home. She has shifts until 6 on Tuesdays." An uncomfortable silence filled the car. Penny cleared her throat. "Want me to drop you at the front door?" "No," I decided, suddenly wary of walking through my own front entrance. "Around back. The kitchen door has a keypad." Penny parked on the street, then helped me along the side path to the rear of the house. Every step sent needles of pain through my skull, but now there was something else propelling me forward, a sick, cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. Inside, the house was quiet and dim. Penny found my inhaler on the bedside table, exactly where I'd left it that morning. The medicated mist brought immediate, blessed relief as it entered my lungs and bloodstream. "You should rest," she whispered, helping me to the living room couch. "I can close the blinds." I nodded gratefully, sinking into the cushions as she darkened the room. The worst of the migraine was receding, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Will you be okay if I go?" she asked. "Yes. Thank you, Penny." After she left, I drifted into merciful darkness. I'm not sure how long I slept before voices pulled me back to consciousness. Female voices from the dining room, speaking in hushed but animated tones. "He has no idea," said my wife's voice, followed by laughter I barely recognized as hers. I froze, suddenly wide awake as my world prepared to shatter. I lay perfectly still on the couch, the medication having dulled my migraine to a manageable throb. The shadows of the living room concealed me, while the voices from the dining room grew clearer. I recognized the second voice now, Robin, April's best friend since college. "I still can't believe you're actually doing this, April." Robin's tone held a mix of shock and disapproval. "What's not to believe?" My wife's voice had a lightness I hadn't heard in months, certainly not when she spoke to me. Carl is everything Chris isn't. Ambitious, exciting, spontaneous. And married, Robin interjected. April laughed, a sound that pierced me deeper than any migraine. He's separating from Helen. They're just waiting for the right time to announce it. I should have made my presence known. Should have walked into that room and confronted them. But some primitive self-preservation instinct kept me frozen, listening. How long has this been going on? Robin asked. 3 months. April's voice softened. Since the day I started at the medical center. He interviewed me, you know. I think he hired me because he wanted me. 3 months. The timeline crashed through my mind. While I was working 60-hour weeks to secure my promotion, while I was house hunting for the perfect place for our family, while I was taking the boys to soccer practice alone because she claimed to be swamped with work, she was sleeping with her boss. What about the kids? What about Chris? Robin pressed. Chris will be fine. April's dismissive tone made my stomach clench. His promotion came at the perfect time, actually. Better alimony for me. Alimony? You're planning to divorce him? The clink of ice in a glass. April mixing another drink, most likely. Carl's been offered a position heading up a new cardiology department in Colorado. We're moving there together. Taking the kids, of course. The room seemed to spin around me, and it had nothing to do with my migraine. Our sons, 8-year-old Chris Jr. and 6-year-old Charles, ripped away to another state with the man who'd stolen my wife. April, listen to yourself, Robin said, her voice dropping lower. Chris has built his entire life around you and the boys. He turned down that job in Seattle because you didn't want to move. He works himself to the bone for your family. And that's the problem, April retorted. He's so predictable. So boring. Everything planned out, everything by the book. Do you know he keeps a maintenance schedule for the lawnmower? Who does that? The contempt in her voice was like acid burning through every memory I cherished. The vacation to Maui we'd saved 3 years for. The surprised look on her face when I gave her the pearl necklace for our 5th anniversary. The night spent planning our future together. Besides, April continued, I'm not sure he's been entirely faithful either. Robin gasped. Chris? No way. I checked his phone last week. That secretary of his boss, Penny, they text a lot. Late at night sometimes. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Those texts were about the surprise party I was planning for April's 35th birthday next month. Penny was helping me coordinate with the venue. I hired a private investigator, April said smugly, just to cover my bases for the custody hearing. If I can prove he's having an affair, the judge will see things my way. My blood ran cold. She was systematically planning to destroy me, my marriage, my relationship with my children, my reputation. That seems excessive, Robin said quietly. And frankly cruel. It's just business, April replied. Carl says, Robin interrupted. Do you even hear yourself? You've known this man 3 months and you're willing to tear apart your family on his say-so? You don't understand what we have. April's voice took on a dreamy quality that twisted the knife deeper. When he looks at me, I feel alive again. When he touches me. Stop. Robin cut her off. I don't need details. But I think you're making a terrible mistake. Chris loves you. He loves your boys. Love isn't enough, Robin. Carl can give me the life I deserve. My chest constricted as 8 years of marriage collapsed under the weight of her words. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every midnight drive to the emergency room when one of the boys had a fever, all of it meaningless to her. I shifted slightly, trying to relieve the pressure in my lungs, needing more air. My elbow bumped the side table, sending a small lamp crashing to the floor. The sudden silence was deafening. What was that? April's voice had lost its confident edge. Is someone there? Robin called out. I could have stayed hidden, could have slunk away to gather my thoughts. But the man I was raised to be, honest, direct, facing problems head-on, wouldn't allow it. With effort, I pushed myself up from the couch and stepped into the threshold between the living room and dining room. The expression on April's face as she saw me standing there, pale, disheveled, my eyes burning with knowledge and betrayal, is something I'll never forget. Not fear, not shame. Just annoyance at being caught like a child with her hand in the cookie jar. Robin, on the other hand, looked mortified, her cheeks flaming red. How long have you been there? April demanded, recovering quickly. Long enough, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Long enough to know exactly who you are. And in that moment, as my world lay in ruins around me, I realized I was looking at a stranger wearing my wife's face. The 3 of us stood frozen in a tableau of shock and discovery. Robin stared at the floor, her wineglass clutched in a white-knuckled grip. April's eyes narrowed, calculating her next move. The weight of everything I'd heard pressed down on me like a physical force. "How dare you spy on us?" April finally said, her voice shifting from surprise to righteous indignation with practiced ease. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Spy? In my own living room? "I should go," Robin murmured, already gathering her purse. "No, stay," April commanded. "Chris is obviously confused. He has these migraines, they make him paranoid sometimes." She took a step toward me, her face arranged in a mask of concern that, just hours ago, I might have believed. "Honey, you should be in bed. Did you take your medication?" The syrupy sweetness of her tone made my stomach turn. Or maybe that was the migraine medication mixing with stress and an empty stomach. Either way, I felt bile rising in my throat. "Don't," I managed, backing away from her outstretched hand. "Don't pretend you care." April's expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous. Robin and I were just talking, having a little girl time. You know how we exaggerate things when—" "3 months with Carl Cummings?" I interrupted. "Colorado. Divorce. Private investigator." "Which part was an exaggeration, April?" Robin inched toward the door. "I really should." "Yes, you should," I agreed, turning to her. "But before you go, was any of it not true? Was she making it all up for girl time?" Robin's eyes flicked between April and me, torn between friendship and basic decency. I didn't know until today," she finally said. "About all of it, I mean." April's face contorted with fury. "Seriously, Robin? You're taking his side." "This isn't about sides," Robin replied quietly. "Chris deserves better than this, April. You know he does." Without another word, Robin slipped past me and out the front door, leaving April and me alone with the wreckage of our marriage. The nausea hit me suddenly, violently. I barely made it to the downstairs bathroom, retching painfully into the toilet. April's footsteps followed me, stopping at the doorway. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said, disgust evident in her voice. "You're weak. Pathetic. Carl would never." I slammed the bathroom door in her face, cutting off whatever comparison she was about to make. For several minutes, I knelt on the cold tile floor, trying to gather my strength and my thoughts. When I emerged, April was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed defensively. "We need to talk about this like adults," she began. "No," I said, my voice remarkably calm considering the hurricane of emotions inside me. "What we need to do is pick up our children." Her eyes widened slightly. "The boys are at Pete and Robin's. They're fine there until dinner." "I'm going to get them now," I replied, moving past her toward the door. "They're my sons too, and I'm not leaving them." April grabbed my arm, panic breaking through her composed facade. "What are you telling them? What are you going to say?" For the first time in our marriage, I looked at her without love clouding my vision. The beautiful woman I'd married had become something unrecognizable, calculating, cold, a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Nothing," I assured her. "Unlike you, I won't use our children as pawns." The drive to Pete and Robin's house 3 doors down was the longest of my life. Each step on their walkway required monumental effort. Pete answered on the first knock, his expression grave. Robin must have called him. "Chris," he said, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. "Man, I don't know what to say." Pete Anderson had been my friend since we both moved into the neighborhood 4 years ago. We'd built a treehouse for our kids together, watched football games, shared beers on countless weekends. "Did you know?" I asked, the question burning in my throat. Pete's jaw tightened. "No. And Robin didn't either until today. She's upstairs crying her eyes out." "I heard April tell her it's been going on for 3 months," I said. Pete ran a hand over his face. "Jesus, Chris. I'm so sorry." Inside, I could hear children laughing. My boys, Pete's daughter, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. "The boys," I said. "I need to take them home." Pete nodded. "Of course. But are you okay to drive? You look like hell." "I'm fine," I lied. "The migraine's better." Pete disappeared inside, returning moments later with Chris Jr. and Charlie, their backpacks slung over small shoulders, faces bright with the simple joy of having played with friends. "Daddy." Charlie launched himself at me, wrapping arms around my waist. "We built a fort with blankets and had a battle." "That sounds awesome, buddy," I managed, ruffling his hair. Chris Jr., more perceptive at 8, studied my face. "Are you sick again, Dad? Your eyes look funny." I forced a smile. "Just a little headache. Nothing to worry about." Pete caught my eye over their heads, his expression saying everything words couldn't. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. As I walked my sons back to our house, the house that no longer felt like a home, I promised myself one thing. No matter what April had planned, no matter what her doctor boyfriend had schemed, I would not lose my children. I just had no idea yet how high the cost of that promise would be. Dinner that evening was an exercise in emotional theater. April set the table with our good plates, as if the ceramic and silverware could somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between us. The boys sensed the tension, their usual dinnertime chatter subdued. "How was school today?" I asked, desperate to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Chris Jr. pushed peas around his plate. "We learned about the solar system. I got to be Jupiter in the model we made." "That's great, buddy." I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "Jupiter's the biggest planet, right?" "Yeah, but Tommy got to be the sun, which is way cooler." Charlie, not to be outdone, piped up. "My team won at dodgeball. I got 3 people out." April smiled at him, a genuine smile that didn't reach her eyes when they flickered to me. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You're getting so good at sports." The mundane conversation continued, a bizarre counterpoint to the knowledge churning inside me. While we discussed spelling tests and playground politics, all I could hear was April's voice. "Better alimony for me? We're moving to Colorado. Taking the kids, of course." After dinner, I volunteered to put the boys to bed. It had always been our special time, stories and quiet talks that sometimes revealed more about their days than any direct questioning could. Tonight, I lingered over each word of The Hobbit, our current bedtime story, dreading the conversation that would follow once they were asleep. Charlie drifted off first, his breathing deep and even. Chris Jr. held out longer, fighting sleep as if sensing something was wrong. "Dad?" he mumbled, eyelids drooping despite his efforts. "Yeah, son? Are you and Mom fighting?" The simple question pierced me. Children always know, no matter how carefully you try to hide it. "We had a disagreement," I said carefully. "But you don't need to worry about it." Is that why she was crying in the bathroom? I hadn't known she'd been crying. The thought gave me no satisfaction. "Sometimes grown-ups get sad too," I replied. "But we still love you and Charlie more than anything in the world. That will never change no matter what." He seemed to accept this, finally surrendering to sleep. I stood watching him, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the way his hair fell across his forehead, so like mine at that age. Downstairs, April waited in the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand. She'd changed into silk pajamas, the ones I'd given her last Christmas. "We need to talk," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Yes, we do." I remained standing, unwilling to sit for what was coming. April took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "What you heard today. I wasn't going to tell you like this." "How were you going to tell me, April? With divorce papers? Or after you'd already moved our sons halfway across the country?" She flinched slightly. "That's not fair. Carl and I." "I don't want to hear about Carl," I interrupted, the name bitter on my tongue. "I want to know how long you've been planning this. How long you've been lying to my face every day." "It wasn't planned," she insisted. "It just happened. Carl understands me in ways you never have. 3 months ago you said you loved me. Was that a lie too?" April looked away. "I did love you. But people change, Chris. We've grown apart." "No," I said firmly. "You grew apart. I'm still the same man who promised to love you through better or worse." She rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive of our 8 years together that it stole my breath. "And that's the problem. You never change, never take risks. Your entire life is scheduled and predictable. That stability gave you the freedom to pursue your career, to be spontaneous," I pointed out. "Someone had to be the rock for our family. And now I need something different." She leaned forward. "Let's be practical about this. We can arrange joint custody. You'll see the boys on weekends." "Stop," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not negotiating terms tonight. I can't even look at you right now." Her expression hardened. "Where are you going?" "I need space to think. I'm staying at Clyde's tonight." My brother's apartment was small, but he'd understand. April's composure cracked. "You can't leave. What about the boys?" "I'll be back in the morning to take them to school like I always do." She stood abruptly, wine sloshing over the rim of her glass. "If you walk out that door, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you threatened me." I stared at her, this stranger wearing my wife's face. "You'd lie about domestic violence? Seriously? Try me," she hissed. "You take one step toward that door, and I'll make sure you never see the boys again except under supervision." Something cold and calculating clicked into place in my mind. Without breaking eye contact, I reached slowly into my pocket, pulled out my phone and placed it on the counter. "Say that again," I challenged quietly. Her eyes darted to the phone, understanding dawning. "You wouldn't dare record me." I said nothing, just waited. April's face contorted with fury. "Fine. Go. See if I care." I picked up the phone, stopped the recording and pocketed it. Then I calmly went upstairs, packed an overnight bag and kissed my sleeping sons on their foreheads. At the front door I paused. "I'll be back at 7 to take them to school." April stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "This isn't over, Chris." "No," I agreed, meeting her gaze one last time. "It's just beginning." As I drove to my brother's apartment, I punched his number on the car's Bluetooth. "Hey little brother," Clyde answered. "Bit late for a social call." "I need a place to crash tonight," I said, my voice finally breaking. "And maybe a lawyer." "I'll put on coffee," he replied without hesitation. "And I've got someone better than a lawyer waiting for you." I pulled into the parking lot of Clyde's apartment complex just before midnight. The drive had been a blur of streetlights and talk radio, anything to drown out the thoughts spinning in my head. My brother was waiting at the door of his ground floor unit, his ex-cop instincts evident in the way his eyes scanned the parking lot before focusing on me. "You look like hell," he said by way of greeting, pulling me into a rough hug. "Feels appropriate," I replied, my voice hollow even to my own ears. As we entered his modest apartment, I noticed we weren't alone. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses sat at Clyde's small dining table, legal papers spread before him. "Chris, this is Mike Dowson," Clyde said. "Best family law attorney in the state and an old friend from the academy before he decided catching bad guys wasn't lucrative enough." Mike stood, extending his hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." I shook his hand automatically, then turned to Clyde. "You called a lawyer before I even got here?" Clyde's expression was grim. "When my brother calls saying his wife is having an affair and threatening false domestic violence charges, I don't waste time." "Coffee?" Mike offered, gesturing to the pot on the counter. "Or something stronger? You look like you could use it." I collapsed into a chair, suddenly bone-tired. "Coffee's fine. I need to think clearly." While Clyde poured, Mike sat across from me. "Clyde gave me the basics, but I need to hear everything from you. Start at the beginning." For the next 20 minutes, I recounted the day's events. The migraine, Penny driving me home, overhearing April's conversation with Robin, the confrontation, and finally April's threats when I tried to leave. "You recorded her threat?" Mike asked, leaning forward. I pulled out my phone, found the audio file and played it. April's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. "If you walk out that door, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you threatened me." Mike nodded approvingly. "Smart move. Not admissible in court in this state without her consent, but useful for negotiations." Negotiations. The word tasted bitter. "I don't want to negotiate. I want my sons." "Which is exactly why we need to be strategic," Mike said, his tone softening. "Clyde mentioned you have migraines?" "Vascular anomaly," I explained. "Diagnosed 3 years ago. Medication usually keeps it under control." Mike made a note. "Your wife will use that against you in a custody battle. She'll claim your condition makes you an unreliable caretaker." The thought hadn't occurred to me. That's absurd. I've never had an episode around the boys that affected my ability to care for them. "Doesn't matter," Clyde interjected. "She'll twist it. Make it sound like you could collapse at any moment, leaving the kids in danger." "So what do I do?" The helplessness in my voice disgusted me. Mike leaned back, considering. "First, we document everything. Your medical condition, treatment plan, how well it's managed. We get statements from your doctor confirming it doesn't impair your parenting abilities." "What about her affair? The plans to move the boys to Colorado?" "Adultery doesn't influence custody decisions as much as people think," Mike said. "But planning to relocate the children without your knowledge or consent, that's something judges take seriously." Clyde, who had been pacing the small living room, stopped suddenly. "What about her devices? Phone, computer? If she's been planning this for months, there might be evidence." Mike nodded. "Emails, texts, travel searches for Colorado. If we could legally access those, it would strengthen our position considerably." "I have access to our home computer," I said. "It's technically mine. I bought it before we were married." "Perfect," Mike replied. "But we need to be careful. If she's hired a private investigator, as you mentioned, she's already preparing for battle." The reality of what was happening crashed over me in waves. Yesterday, I was a husband worried about a work presentation. Tonight, I was strategizing how to prevent my children from being taken away. There's something else, I said, remembering the phone call I'd overheard as I was leaving. April called someone right after our argument. I heard her say, "He knows everything," before I closed the door. "The boyfriend," Clyde muttered. "Dr. Carl Cummings. We should look into him too," Mike said. "His influence at the medical center where your wife works could be relevant." I checked my watch. Nearly 2 in the morning. I promised the boys I'd take them to school tomorrow. I need to be there by 7. Mike gathered his papers. "Get some rest. Tomorrow go about your normal routine with the kids. Don't confront April again. Document any interactions with her, times, what was said, who was present. And see if you can get access to that computer," Clyde added. "My buddy in cybersecurity could help us recover deleted files." As Mike packed up his briefcase, he paused. "One more thing, Chris. No matter what happens, remember that courts generally favor keeping children with both parents when possible. This isn't the 1950s. Fathers have rights too." After he left, Clyde made up the couch with sheets and a pillow. "Try to sleep. You'll need your strength." I lay down, but sleep was impossible. All I could see when I closed my eyes were my sons' faces, and all I could hear was April's voice planning to take them away. "I won't lose them," I whispered into the darkness. "Whatever it takes." My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected April, but instead saw George's name on the screen. The message was brief and devastating. "Need to see you tomorrow. HR issues. 9 a.m. sharp." The hits just kept coming. Morning came too quickly. I showered in Clyde's cramped bathroom, my reflection in the mirror startling, hollow eyes and stubble making me look years older. By 6:30, I was in my car driving back to the house that no longer felt like home. I found April in the kitchen, already dressed for work in a crisp blouse and pencil skirt I didn't recognize. New clothes she hadn't bothered to mention. Another small betrayal among the larger ones. "You came back," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. "I told you I would." I moved past her to start the boys' breakfast. I always keep my promises. The barb landed. She busied herself with her coffee, avoiding my gaze. "Chris," she said finally. "About last night?" "Not now," I cut her off. "Not with the boys about to come down." As if on cue, the thunder of small feet pounded down the stairs. Charlie burst into the kitchen first, flinging himself at me. "Dad, you're making pancakes." I lifted him onto a stool at the counter. "Sure am, buddy. Blueberry, your favorite." Chris Jr. followed, more reserved, studying both his mother and me with eyes too perceptive for an 8-year-old. "I thought you left early for work," he said, climbing onto his own stool. I flipped a pancake with deliberate casualness. "Nope. Got a meeting later this morning, so I thought we'd have breakfast together first." April watched our interaction, her coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips. Was that guilt in her eyes? Or just calculation? Breakfast passed in a mimicry of normalcy, the boys chattering about school projects and playground politics while April and I orbited each other like wary satellites. After dropping them at school with extra tight hugs, I drove home knowing April would be waiting. She ambushed me the moment I walked through the door. "You were fired." I froze. "What?" "George called me this morning." Her lips curved in a smirk that looked alien on her once-loved face. "Something about unprofessional behavior?" "A complaint from the medical center." The pieces clicked together instantly. Carl. The bastard had used his influence to get me fired. "Interesting timing," I said, keeping my voice level. "Almost like someone planned it." April shrugged, feigning indifference. "Maybe you should have thought about that before spying on me and making a scene." "Is that what Carl told you to say?" I asked, moving toward the stairs. "Or did you come up with that all by yourself?" Her eyes narrowed. "Where are you going?" "To get some documents I need." I climbed the stairs without waiting for her response. In our home office, I sat at the computer, my computer as Mike had pointed out. April had been using it more frequently over the past months, claiming her laptop was too slow. Now I understood why she'd wanted access to a device that wasn't hers. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood, approaching the office. Quickly, I inserted the flash drive Clyde had given me that morning, loaded with software his IT friend had provided. "What are you doing?" April appeared in the doorway. "Looking for our insurance documents," I lied smoothly. "Since I'm suddenly unemployed, I need to check our coverage." She hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward a filing cabinet. "Should be in the 3rd drawer." "Thanks," I said, not moving from the computer. The software was running silently in the background, copying browsing history, email caches, and deleted files. April lingered, suspicion evident in her posture. "I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." I clicked through folders as if searching, buying time for the program to finish. "This doesn't have to be messy," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "You sign the papers agreeing to my terms, joint custody with primary residence with me, reasonable alimony, and I won't mention your episodes to the judge." I turned to face her fully. "My episodes?" "The migraines," she clarified. "How can you care for children when you might collapse at any moment? What if you were driving them when it happened?" The cold calculation in her voice made my skin crawl. This was the woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children. "And if I don't agree?" Her expression hardened. "Then I'll do what's necessary to protect my children." "Our children," I corrected. "And I think we're done here." The flash drive had finished its work. I removed it, pocketed it, and stood. April blocked the doorway. "I knew you when you worked at that greasy garage, Chris. You were nothing. I helped make you who you are." Something inside me, perhaps the last thread of affection I'd felt for her, snapped cleanly. "No, April. I've always known exactly who I am. You're the one who's been pretending." I brushed past her and down the stairs, her voice following me like acid. "You'll regret this. Carl has connections. You'll never work in this industry again." Outside, I sat in my car for a long moment, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed George's number. "Chris," he answered, his voice tight. "I was hoping you'd call before coming in." "I know I'm fired," I said. April told me. A long silence followed. "I'm sorry, Chris. The complaint came from Dr. Cummings himself. Said you'd been harassing his staff. The board insisted I let you go immediately." "It's a lie, George. He's having an affair with April." Another pause. "Jesus. I had no idea." He sighed heavily. "That explains a lot, actually. Especially why he was so insistent we terminate you without investigation." "I need a favor," I said. "My lawyer needs documentation of the complaint. And the timing." "Your lawyer?" George repeated. "Already at that stage, huh?" "It's about to get worse before it gets better," I admitted. "I'll have Penny email you everything," he promised. "And Chris? Brighton Equipment called this morning. Seems they heard you're available. Might want to give them a call." As I drove to Clyde's apartment, clutching the flash drive with what I hoped was enough evidence to protect my future with my sons, I allowed myself a grim smile. April and her doctor had overplayed their hand. They had no idea what I was capable of when fighting for my children. The next week passed in a blur of lawyers, temporary housing arrangements, and clandestine meetings. I rented a small apartment close to the boys' school, filled it with second-hand furniture, and tried to make it feel like somewhere my sons could call home every other weekend. The temporary arrangement Mike had negotiated while the courts processed our case. Brighton Equipment didn't just offer me a job. They offered me a better position than I'd had before, with a substantial salary increase. Apparently, my reputation in the industry outweighed whatever lies Carl might have spread. "Your timing is perfect," the operations director told me during the interview. "We just landed that Westfield contract your old company was bidding on." The irony wasn't lost on me. The meeting I'd missed due to my migraine had led to a chain of events that ultimately resulted in a better career opportunity. But the professional win did nothing to ease the ache of my fractured family. On a rain-soaked Tuesday evening, Clyde called with unexpected news. "We need to meet," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "And you need to bring Mike." "What's happened?" "Not over the phone. Just come to O'Malley's pub downtown. 7 o'clock. When I arrived, Clyde was already in a corner booth with Mike and 3 women I didn't recognize. They fell silent as I approached, all eyes evaluating me. "Chris," Clyde greeted me with a clap on the shoulder. "Meet Sarah, Jenna, and Melissa. They all work, or worked, at the medical center." I shook their hands, confusion giving way to understanding as Clyde continued. "Sarah was a nurse in cardiology until 3 months ago. Jenna is still a nurse in the ER. And Melissa works in the pharmacy." "Ex-pharmacy tech," the petite blonde corrected. "As of last week." Mike gestured for me to sit. "These ladies have something in common. Something relevant to your situation." Sarah, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw, spoke first. "Dr. Cummings has a pattern. He targets female employees, usually ones who are new or vulnerable in some way. Charms them, makes them feel special, promises them things. Things like promotions?" I guessed. "Or protection," Jenna added. I was on probation after a medication error. Carl, Dr. Cummings, implied he could make the review board go easy on me if I was friendly. My stomach churned. And April? My wife. New hire, attractive, ambitious, Sarah said with a shrug. Exactly his type. I refused him, Melissa said quietly. Next thing I knew, there were inventory discrepancies in the pharmacy, and all signs pointed to me. I processed this information, anger building like pressure in a sealed container. How many women has he done this to? That we know of? At least 7 in the past 2 years, Clyde said. And 3 of them are willing to testify about his character if needed. Mike leaned forward. This changes things, Chris. If we can establish a pattern of predatory behavior from Dr. Cummings, and suggest April is another victim rather than a willing participant. She's not a victim, I interrupted, remembering her cold calculations, her threats. She knew exactly what she was doing. Maybe now, Sarah conceded. But at the beginning? Carl is very good at what he does. He makes you feel like you're the only one who understands him, who appreciates his brilliance. By the time you realize what's happening, you're already compromised. I thought about April's behavior over the past months, the gradual withdrawal, the secretive phone calls, the late nights. Had she been manipulated by a practiced predator? The possibility didn't excuse her actions but added a layer of complexity I hadn't considered. There's more, Clyde said. My IT guy found something interesting on those files we recovered. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails and bank statements. I skimmed them, my confusion growing. Online gambling sites? Mike nodded grimly. Your wife has been busy. Almost $20,000 from your joint savings transferred to various gambling websites over the past 6 months. And this, Clyde added, pointing to an email exchange. Between April and Dr. Cummings, planning your termination. I read the damning words, bow rising in my throat. Once he's fired, his position for custody will be much weaker. My contact at the medical board says we can potentially use his medical condition to question his fitness as a primary caregiver. Carl's response was equally calculating. Helen still suspects nothing. Once the divorce is final and we relocate to Colorado, we can be more open. The cardiology department there has already confirmed my position. Just make sure you get primary custody. I don't want to deal with constant visitations from your ex. The final revelation hit me like a physical blow. Helen? I looked up at Sarah. He's married? She nodded. 15 years. His wife is on the hospital board of directors. And April knows this? According to those emails, Mike said, she believes they're separating. But my investigator found no evidence of any divorce proceedings. I sat back, processing this tsunami of information. So my wife is being played by a serial predator who has no intention of leaving his wife, while simultaneously helping him destroy my career and take my children. That's the short version, Clyde confirmed. What do we do with this? I asked Mike. His smile was wolf-like. We prepare for war. And then we offer peace on our terms. As the women shared more details about Carl's manipulation tactics, a plan began to form, one that might not just protect my relationship with my sons, but expose Carl Cummings for the predator he was. For the first time since finding that strange car in my driveway, I felt something like hope. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined, more claustrophobic. Wood panels absorbed sound, creating an unnatural hush broken only by the rustle of papers and whispered conversations. I sat beside Mike at the plaintiff's table, my freshly pressed suit feeling like costume armor. April sat across the aisle with her attorney, a sharp-featured woman whose reputation for aggressive tactics had earned her the nickname Piranha in legal circles. My wife had dressed for the role of the wounded spouse, conservative navy dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a modest bun. The transformation from the vengeful woman who'd threatened me in our kitchen was remarkable. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a veteran family court justice with steel gray hair and piercing eyes, entered and called the emergency hearing to order. This is a petition for temporary custody filed by Mrs. Peterson, she announced, skimming documents. Before I hear arguments, I want to be clear. My sole concern is the welfare of the minor children involved. This is not the venue for airing marital grievances. April's attorney rose. Your Honor, my client seeks emergency custody due to concerns about Mr. Peterson's ability to safely care for their sons. Mr. Peterson suffers from a serious medical condition causing unpredictable episodes of incapacitation. My jaw clenched. Right on script, exactly as they'd planned. Furthermore, the attorney continued, Mr. Peterson has displayed erratic behavior since the separation, including unannounced visits to my client's workplace. That was a blatant lie. I hadn't been near the medical center. Mike stood, his calm demeanor a counterpoint to the piranha's theatrical indignation. Your Honor, my client's medical condition is well managed with medication, as documented by his neurologist. He submitted a folder to the clerk. In the 8 years since their children were born, there has never been an incident where Mr. Peterson's condition compromised their safety. The judge reviewed the medical documents while Mike continued. As for the alleged workplace visits, Mr. Peterson hasn't been to the medical center since his annual physical in January. We believe Mrs. Peterson is creating these allegations to strengthen her position. April's attorney bristled. Your Honor, we have evidence of my client's concerns. She produced a manila envelope. These photographs show bruising on Mrs. Peterson's arm from an altercation last week. My blood ran cold as the clerk handed close-up photos to the judge. April, looking appropriately distressed, touched her upper arm absently. Mr. Peterson, Judge Harmon addressed me directly. Did you physically assault your wife? Absolutely not, Your Honor, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. I haven't been alone with April since the night I moved out, and I certainly never touched her. Mrs. Peterson claims this incident occurred when you came to collect the children last Tuesday, her attorney interjected. I opened my mouth to respond, but Mike placed a warning hand on my arm. Your Honor, he said, last Tuesday my client was in Riverside with both children visiting the Science Museum, as part of his regular visitation. We have time-stamped photographs and admission receipts. He produced another folder. Additionally, we'd like to present a witness who has relevant information regarding these allegations. The judge frowned. This is highly irregular for an emergency hearing, but given the serious nature of the accusations, I'll allow it. Who is this witness? Miss Penelope Garza, Your Honor. The courtroom doors opened and Penny walked in looking nervous but determined. April's face went slack with surprise. After Penny was sworn in, Mike asked simply, Ms. Garza, what information do you have regarding the alleged incident between Mr. and Mrs. Peterson last Tuesday? Penny cleared her throat. I manage the security system at the Peterson residence. The system includes exterior cameras that record all approaches to the house. She pulled a flash drive from her purse. This contains footage from last Tuesday, showing Mrs. Peterson arriving home alone at 5:30 p.m., and Dr. Carl Cummings arriving at 6. There was no visit from Mr. Peterson that day. The judge's expression darkened. Let's see this footage. The court clerk set up a laptop and projector. Crystal clear video showed exactly what Penny had described. No sign of me, but clear images of April entering the house and later Carl Cummings arriving with a bottle of wine. More damning was the second clip from Wednesday morning, showing April examining her arm in the porch light, then methodically pressing something against it repeatedly before wincing in pain. She's giving herself the bruise, someone whispered loudly from the gallery. Order, the judge demanded, though she too was staring at the screen in disbelief. April's face had gone from pale to ashen. Her attorney was frantically whispering in her ear. Judge Harmon removed her glasses slowly. Mrs. Peterson, are you prepared to explain what we've just seen? April's composure cracked. He told me no one would question it, she blurted. That judges always side with the mother. He being Dr. Cummings? Mike asked. She nodded mutely, then buried her face in her hands. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harmon banged her gavel sharply. This hearing is now about more than custody, she announced. Mrs. Peterson, you've committed perjury and attempted to manipulate this court with false evidence. There will be an investigation and potential criminal charges. She turned to me. Mr. Peterson, you are granted temporary full custody of your children, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Peterson pending further review. Her gaze softened slightly. I'm sorry you and your children have been subjected to this. As we left the courtroom, April caught my arm. Her eyes were wild with panic. Chris, please. Carl said it would just help the case. I never thought. Save it for your new lawyer, I said quietly. You'll need one. Behind us, Penny was already speaking with a court officer about submitting the complete security footage for the investigation. And somewhere across town, Dr. Carl Cummings was about to discover that his carefully constructed world was beginning to unravel. 1 year later, I sat on a park bench watching my sons chase each other across the playground. Chris Jr., now 9, had shot up 3 inches in the past year and developed a passion for astronomy. Charlie, 7 and fearless as ever, scaled the climbing structure with the agility of a monkey, waving triumphantly from the top. Dad, look how high I am. Amazing, buddy. I called back, my heart doing its usual flip-flop at his daredevil antics. Just remember the rules about coming down safely. The autumn sun warmed my face as I savored this simple moment of normalcy. These past 12 months had been anything but normal. Court appearances, therapy sessions, tearful questions from the boys, and the painstaking process of rebuilding our lives piece by piece. April's dramatic collapse in court had been just the beginning. The investigation revealed not only her deception about the bruises but also the full extent of her gambling addiction. When her bank records showed she had drained our joint savings and maxed out credit cards in my name, the judge had been unequivocal. Full custody to me, with April permitted only supervised visitation until she completed addiction treatment and parenting classes. Dr. Carl Cummings' downfall had been even more spectacular. When the hospital board, including his wife Helen, learned of his pattern of sexual coercion and the falsified complaint against me, they launched an ethics investigation. 3 more women came forward with similar stories. Within weeks, he was terminated for gross misconduct and faced a review by the medical licensing board. A shadow fell across the bench, pulling me from my thoughts. "Sorry I'm late," Anna said, sitting beside me. "Group ran over today." Dr. Anna Chen, child psychologist extraordinaire, had entered our lives 6 months ago when I'd enrolled the boys in her support group for children of divorce. With her gentle insight and unfailing patience, she'd helped them process their confusion and anger. "How are they doing?" I asked, watching as her 10-year-old daughter Lily joined my sons on the playground. "Making good progress," she said. "Chris Jr. still has some abandonment concerns, but he's expressing them now instead of bottling everything up. And Charlie's aggression issues have improved significantly." "Thanks to you," I said, turning to meet her eyes. She smiled, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "No thanks to them. They're incredibly resilient kids. And they have an amazing father." The warmth in her voice made something flutter in my chest, a sensation I'd long thought dead and buried in the wreckage of my marriage. Our relationship had evolved gradually from professional to friendly to something more, though we'd both been careful to maintain boundaries while the boys were in her group. Now that they'd graduated to monthly check-ins with a different counselor, we were cautiously exploring the connection between us. "How was your doctor's appointment yesterday?" she asked. "Promising," I replied. "The new treatment protocol has reduced my migraine frequency by almost 70%. Dr. Patel thinks we might get even better results with some fine-tuning." Anna reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's wonderful news, Chris." The sound of approaching footsteps made us both look up. My stomach tightened instinctively at the sight of April walking toward us, right on schedule for her bi-weekly supervised visit. She looked better than she had in months, clear-eyed, with healthy color in her cheeks. The court-appointed supervisor, Mrs. Winters, nodded a greeting as they approached. "Hey, Mom's here." Charlie spotted her and raced over, Chris Jr. following more hesitantly. I stood, encouraging Anna to remain seated with a subtle gesture. These transitions were still delicate. "Hi, April," I said evenly. "They've had lunch, but there's snacks in their backpacks if they get hungry later." She nodded, eyes darting to Anna then back to me. "Thanks. I was thinking we could go to the Science Museum today if that's okay?" "Sounds great." I turned to the boys. "Be good for Mom, okay? I'll pick you up at 5. After they departed for their 4-hour visit, I rejoined Anna on the bench. Lily had found other children to play with, giving us a rare moment alone. "That gets easier every time," I observed. Anna leaned slightly against my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, you know. Despite everything, maintaining their relationship with her matters." "I know," I sighed. "Some days it's harder than others to remember that." Last week I'd received a letter from April, handwritten, tear-stained in places. After completing rehab for her gambling addiction and 6 months of therapy, she'd found work at a hospice caring for elderly patients. The letter was a thorough apology, acknowledging her betrayal and thanking me for not cutting her off from the boys entirely. It was the first genuinely remorseful thing I'd seen from her since this nightmare began. "What are you thinking about?" Anna asked. "The future," I replied honestly. "For the first time in a long time, I'm thinking beyond survival mode." She smiled. "And what do you see in this future?" I took her hand, intertwining our fingers. "More days like this. Healing. The boys growing up happy. Maybe." I hesitated, then continued, "Maybe a chance to build something new." "I'd like that," she said softly. As we sat there watching Lily play, I reflected on how life's worst storms sometimes clear the way for unexpected blessings. The path had been brutal, marked by betrayal and pain, but looking at where we'd landed, My sons thriving, my health improving, and this remarkable woman beside me, I finally understood what it meant to find grace in brokenness. The invisible cracks that had once threatened to destroy everything had instead created space for something stronger to grow in their place.